but you cannot learn from your average person the kind of wisdom that I'm sharing with you from our elder and ancestor, Malidoma Patrice Some. So I'm going to start off sharing from a chapter out of this book of Water in the Spirit, where he talks about his grandfather's funeral, right? So it's like they have this ritual, people come together, they play different roles because it's supposed to help people in the mourning process. The key is for everyone to participate so that people can mourn properly to help the ancestor cross over to the other realm in peace. So here we go. Unlike people in the West, the Dagra believe it is terrible to suppress one's grief. Only by passionate expression can loss be tamed and assimilated into a form one can live with. The Dagra also believe that the dead have a right to collect their share of tears. A spirit who is not passionately grieved feels anger and disappointment, as if their right to be completely dead has been stolen from them. So it would be improper for a villager to display the kind of restraint and solemnity seen at Western funerals. I'm going to go forward. The chanters standing behind the musicians began their mournful songs, piercing the hearts of the crowd with sorrow. It was their job to provide a structure for the crowd to release their pent-up feelings. Each doleful phrase was followed by a huge howling, begun by the men and concluded by the women. It takes millions of tears to produce a flood capable of washing the dead to the realm of the ancestors. So refraining from weeping wrongs the dead. Rhythm and chanting crack open that part of the self that holds grief under control, but grief unleashed without the help of ritual drummers, musicians, and chanters run the risk of producing another death. It is a force without a container. To the dead, it is useless energy, like food that is wasted while people go hungry. The one experience that all humans share is grief, and it takes the right kind of poetry to set ablaze. Their voices made me quiver. The wailing of a grown-up male makes a child's world grow dim, but it also teaches the child about the adult world he will someday inhabit. An adult who cannot weep is a dangerous person who has forgotten the place emotion holds in a person's life. Though funerals are group activities, there is also space within them for individual initiative. The container created by ritual is big enough to satisfy everyone's needs. Occasionally, the men and women touched by sorrow would move out of the singing crowd, their faces wet with tears, their arms outstretched as if to beg one last time for the return of the departed. Promptly but gently, these individuals were escorted back into the thick of the crowd by friends and relatives. They would comply, crying helplessly and submissively to the great master of the universe, who holds life and death in his hands. When activated, emotion has a ceiling it must reach. At its apex, grief turns the body into a vessel of chaos. But it is just such a climatic chaos that can cleanse both the person and his or her spirit. During a Dagra funeral ritual, all kinds of grief are released. Not just regret for the departed, but all the pain of everyday life. The chanters, accompanied by the male xylophone, might sing that only an unmarried man has the right to cry for a meal, for there is nobody to serve him. The female xylophone would respond with her double note of agreement, or a man who lost his crop to bad weather could use the funeral space to release his complaint, chanting his loss in unison with the melody of the funeral. Meanwhile, the drum would broadcast its deafening rhythm, penetrating every heart in search of hidden miseries. So the reason why I share this is because, yes, in the West, our funerals are pretty quiet and reserved. People cry quietly. They wipe their tears with their tissues and they walk, and sometimes someone holds them and supports them. Every now and then you will see a funeral with Black people where there's some more wailing, but nothing compared to the wailing done abroad and a lot of other places throughout the diaspora. So I remember there was a time when I was at my grandmother's funeral and I was mourning her passing, but I was mourning the relationship that I didn't really have with her. She really was a woman of very little words. I got to find out that she had that same relationship with even her own children. But I didn't find that out until just a few years ago. So I was getting ready to let it out while I was at the funeral. I leaned back over the chair, like I was getting ready to just bawl it out. And all I felt was one of my aunts tap me on my shoulder and tell me, no, 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 no. And I took all that grief and just absorbed it all back in within me. So what happens when that grief is not expressed, it comes out in other ways. So there's a lot of you who have families like this who are actually holding in a lot of their pain. And then when you see other people or you're around other cultures who express their grief, you don't understand it. But it is very important. There was another book, I believe in this book, The Healing Wisdom of Africa, Malidoma Patrice talks about grief in the West and how we do not express our emotions, and we're like basically like a fire about to burn. Oh, here goes. Told you. I wrote here the importance of grief, element of water. Okay. Okay, so it's water. Okay, so he says here, many people in the Western world walk around like time bombs, loaded with contradictory emotions that are often so hard to articulate that the individual is dangerous to himself and to his surroundings. Perhaps first among these emotions is grief. In this culture, the challenge of confronting overwhelming grief must be considered the most crucial task, requiring the reconciling energy of water. Reconciling. In indigenous Africa, one cannot conceive of a community that does not grieve. In my village, people cry every day until grief is restored in the West as the starting place where the modern man and woman might find peace. The culture will continue to abuse and ignore the power of water, and in turn will be fascinated with fire. Grief must be approached as a release of the tension created by separation and disconnection from someone or something that matters. Western men in particular are grieving about the dead they didn't grieve properly because they were told that men don't cry. Ah, my God. In my work, I hear this everywhere. Grief is not only expressed in tears, but also in anger, rage, frustration, and sadness. An angry person is a person on the road to tears, the softer version of grief. Sadness and the feeling of heaviness within are symptomatic of a deep well of grief in the psychic underground. One must ask why tears, the softest expression of grief, are not as acceptable in the modern world as are anger and rage. I say this because to indigenous Africans, emotions are sacred. To villagers, it looks as if the West is uncomfortable with tears because one cannot argue verbally, logically, against this kind of emotion. Villagers also believe that Westerners are afraid of emotion because they are afraid of loss of control. Emotions have the tendency to spread from person to person, and therefore, social control to the Western mind is being risked with any display of emotion. The people that they're going to do the ritual with, I think reading his book will kind of lead you to this because he has things outlined where once you get to the grief ritual, you're probably ready for it because you understand where he's coming from. This is a healing that must take place, right? From the healing wisdom of Africa. Malidoma Patrice Some. So you see how it went from his grandfather's funeral and of water and the spirit, and I jumped over here because I remembered he talked about grief and just the condition that we are in the West. But in the healing wisdom of Africa, he gives you the wisdom. He gives you the ritual. He shows you how you can deal with grief, why we are in a condition that we're in, because we do not grieve, why we have so much pain, frustration, and anger, because we're not properly releasing those emotions of grief. Because when it's a contained emotion that eventually when it comes out, it explodes, and it usually explodes out on the wrong people, the people you love, the people you care about. So you see why I'm saying wisdom, wisdom is in so many places, but I love the wisdom from my elder. So I hope you got something out of that. I had been wanting to share that with you. I actually recorded it on another like a handheld recorder last week because I wanted to get it out. And so, but this one, I just decided to do it on this Sunday afternoon. And I hope you enjoyed what I shared. All right. So peace and love. Thank you so much. It's all about remembering. Remembering.